Welcome to the podcast, Wait, What Do You Do Again? Where we talk to everyday people doing amazing things. I'm your host, Megan DeFord. Let's go. I am with Angela Gutierrez today. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here. Angela is the manager of trend, color, and print at Boston Proper. So what does that mean?
Hi, thanks for having me. It's definitely a title that needs explaining for a lot of people. So I like to explain it to some people as like a concept designer. Like, there's clothing designers and print designers. So I'm kind of a concept designer. Basically, what I do is I look at all the runways and I competitively shop, see what the newest trends are in the market and where I think the trends are going to kind of forecast what we should do for the next year as far as our clothing. But I create trend stories so that there's cohesive sections because Boston Proper is a catalog company. But we also are trying to be more web driven than catalog at this time, but we still want it to feel cohesive when you look at the website. So we do 2 to 3 trend stories per event so that we can keep the color stories cohesive and it has a nice flow to it and makes sense to the customer. And then she'll see the difference from story to story as she goes through the catalog or as she looks through the website.
That's so cool. And you're looking a year in advance typically, or how far in advance are you looking?
Yes, a year. So right now, we currently just finished putting together our summer one event for 25. And then I am pre-concepting right now our fall transition story for fall 25. So like this time next year. Yeah.
Something you said was really interesting. The Boston Proper is a catalog company, which it's always been, correct?
Yes,
And
correct.
so you're doing more with an online presence. How does that work, especially as so many brick and mortar stores are closing actual physical stores and going to online? Has that been an easier transition for the company that you've seen, or is that not really your wheelhouse? You're not, you're not in that area.
It has been because we've always had the website and we've always kind of done those types of things, but the website was never as much of a priority as the catalog was. The catalog was always the number one priority because it was the money maker and it was our bread and butter. But now, business is changing and customers are changing. So we're trying to make sure that we evolve to more of a web presence. So I think we've been doing pretty good with it. I mean, we've definitely bumped up a lot of we do like web only collections to kind of see comparatively how they do versus what we put in the catalog to see like, okay, if we do this without the printed marketing behind it, does it still work for us? And we have seen that it does. So we're trying to see kind of how much we can actually push and how much we can do that is strictly on the web that doesn't get print and see if it still gives us the same bang for our buck.
And is it like you're still telling the same story, just different modes of getting it out to the consumer?
Yes, exactly. We're still trying to like, we always in summer, for example, do like a very Italy inspired, like I did a Positano story this year. So we always kind of do that story for summer. So we still want that to show on the website. We want her to see that. We want it to take her there. We want her to have that mood and that feeling, even though it's not the catalog.
Right.
So we're still trying to make sure that the stories translate in all aspects of it. So on the web, on social media, in emails, we kind of are connecting the thread and making sure that they all tell the same story. We have marketing coming in. We've looked at our processes, definitely. We've had marketing coming in with us much earlier than they used to make sure that we're all on the same page. That wasn't something that we always did. We would meet with them at the very end. So it helps now that we're talking about it from the beginning so they can see everything kind of full circle and make it make sense.
That's really interesting. And who doesn't want to be in Positano? So that's an amazing storyline for the summer.
I mean, that's what I think too. I mean, hello,
Yeah.
as I'm pulling tears and inspirational images, I'm like, I want to be her. I think other people want to be her too.
Yeah, that's so fun. You kind of get to embody, it's almost like Barbie, like you get to embody that, that
Yes.
woman in that storyline. That's really cool. How did you get into this? What did you study? Did you always know you wanted to be in this industry? Tell me a little more about that.
So I always loved fashion, even as a child. I always felt like I wanted to be a fashion designer. I would like draw pictures of clothes when I was little and like little notebooks and stuff. So I went to the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale for fashion design. So I have a Bachelor of Science in Fashion Design. And while I was in college, I worked full time at Anthropology, and that was where I did a lot of visual merchandising and that type of thing for them. So I did different versions of fashion of the industry, like being in design and doing merchandising are different, but it helps you see the full scope. So I worked at Anthropology for a while doing visual merchandising, and then I worked at Ann Taylor Loft after that, and I just was over retail. And I had a friend that I went to college with that worked at Boston Proper, and she had told me they had an opening for the job was the merchandising coordinator. And I was like, I don't care what the job is. Like, I'll do whatever. I just want to do something different, and whatever I can do to get my foot in the door, I'll do. So I was the merchandising coordinator for like 2 years. So basically, that job is helping the buyers with any of their like clerical things, or I would make copies, I would help with the models, I would help take pictures for things, I would help hang samples or pack samples for photo shoots. So I did that for a while, and then we had stores for a small period of time, about 12 of them. When that started happening, I kind of was asking the the boss of that area at that time. I was asking him like if I could get into doing some of the visuals, because that's what I had done at Anthropology, and I was more interested in that. So eventually they brought me over to the store side to help do that. So I worked on the stores for probably 2 years, and then our company got rebought. So we closed the stores. And when that happened, I'm very lucky that, let me just say that the company has seen so much in me that they've been willing to let me try these different things and be in different departments, because a lot of places I don't think do that. So the company here has definitely let me showcase what I can do in different areas. So from the stores was when I started doing trend and kind of pulling runway, looking at our trend services and doing all of that. They even sent me on like a couple photo shoots for a period of time. I was like, oh, I could be our stylist in house. And I was like trying to do that. But then I realized I don't want to travel all the time. So that kind of made that go out the window. But I tested a few different things. And then once I started doing trend, I think that's where I kind of shine, and where I really kind of know what I'm doing. And I've learned so much from the different people I've worked for about how to forecast trends. Like, we joke all the time that we don't have a crystal ball, but there's like a way, when you really look at things, that you can see it, you can see what's coming and what's going. So yeah, that's what I try to do, and I have loved it. I feel very lucky that this is what I get to do.
That's amazing. And
It's a lot.
it's a lot. And it seems like, especially once you got to Boston proper, like obviously you had the education and you had the experience prior to that, but it feels like once you got to Boston proper, you were able to wear so many hats and sort of do everything from soup to nuts, which is probably super helpful to understand how everything works. I have a lot of questions. The two things that are like popping in my mind are The Devil Wears Prada and Project
Oh,
Runway.
yeah.
And so I'll start with the first question of, in Project Runway, so many of the designers seem to go to institutes of fashion. How did your education compare to what your day-to-day life is? Was it more theoretical, or like what does that look like? I was an English major, so everybody's like, you just read books, which is fairly true, but like how does it compare, and how do you feel like it prepared you? for what you're doing now and what you did previously?
So that's so funny that you say people said all you did was read books because I had somebody tell me once that all I do is color, and I was very offended by that.
Honestly, a coloring major sounds incredible. And I guess another sort of follow-up as you're thinking about your answer is, do you feel like that sort of specialized education is better? Or do you think that there's sort of opportunities in other majors, if that makes sense, that would kind of get you to where you can get your foot in the door? Obviously not a coloring major, but
Right,
would
exactly.
art studio or English or history. I think Andre Leon Talley was a French major. So
Right.
just any thoughts you might have around that.
Yeah. So I think you definitely don't necessarily have to have a specialized major. I think this is something that if you're passionate about it and it's something that you want to learn and you want to do, you can definitely do that. I do think my degree helps me in a way of I understand fabric, I understand color, and I understand how garments are put together, which is helpful for my job because of how my company works. So for other companies, maybe that wouldn't be as relevant, but I I am kind of involved in a lot of things where I can say to somebody like, "Oh, my boss is okay with me making suggestions of since I am in charge of print along with my CAD designer, my head CAD designer, her and I work very closely together. Her and I can say, we think this should be on a knit fabric. We don't think this should be woven. We use a fabric called ITY. So I'm like, I think this should be an ITY, easy, stretchy palazzo pant. And they'll say, okay, we get it. So understanding fabric and that definitely helps in my lane. And then color as well, because I am responsible for color here. I don't do as many approvals now. I used to do a lot more color approvals where we would get fabric submittals and I would have to make sure that they were matching standard or that they were acceptable for us to move forward into creating the garment out of. Um, but I do pull all of our color, like I'll pull little palettes together to tell my story. So I am
She's
kind
showing
of
this cool little like Pantone paper with different color palettes on it. That was very neat.
so I do kind of need to understand color and be able to say to somebody like, what do because people will buy garments and they'll say, I love this green. And I'm like, okay, well, do you like this is a little yellow. Do you like that about it? Or do you want a green that is more blue? And
Mhm.
then we'll kind of talk about it and decide. And it's so silly. I'm sure some of the things we talk about sometimes, I'm like, nobody would ever know that we are like, this is a little yellow and understand any of that. They probably think we were nuts if they like heard us. Heard what people talk about here with not here in fashion in general being like, oh, it should be a little more blue. Everybody would be like, what does that even mean?
I am not an artist at all, but I do remember with my kids and when I was a kid, like the primary colors and then you mix and
Yeah,
how it
yes,
changes things. And I can only imagine how, like you saying a green's more yellow makes me think of spring, versus I don't know what else you mix green with, but or blue that might feel more like summer or something like. So I can imagine that
yeah,
would really impact it.
yeah. And sometimes it depends, when we get a garment and if it flares certain colors,
Mhm.
it's not always as attractive on the skin. So like the
Yeah,
point, we just always want it to look nice on all different skin tones. So
yeah.
there's times when I'll definitely like hold up Pantone chips to a couple of the girls in the office that have more of a pink undertone than I do to make sure that
Mhm.
it still is pretty.
Yeah,
So it's definitely a quote unquote science to it, I guess you could
yeah,
say.
yeah. Yeah, I have on my whiteboard, I have different quotes or mantras, and one of them is don't get bored with the basics. And it's so important, right? Like you have to pay attention to that
Very
stuff.
true.
So
Yeah, it's
that's
very
sort of
true.
what it feels like. The other thing that I was thinking about is you're talking about trends and forecasting and you're looking at different things that I'm sure other companies and people are looking at you what I referenced before with the Devil Wears Prada, like where does it start and how far in advance Is it like in sort of the fashion industry, are like there are certain houses or designers, or I don't even know the right terminology, where they're like 2 or 3 years looking out and kind of feeding that back? Or how do trends work?
So there's definitely higher fashion designers and certain more like edgier modern designers. They definitely start at like a macro level of like what's going on, and people don't really realize this, but what's going on in the economy, what's going on with sustainability, what's going on with you know the temperatures and what's happening in this part of the globe and here, and they look at all of that, and they look at
Mhm.
what is this influencer in India doing that could be interesting, or what's this, like it kind of comes from everywhere. Like when people say inspiration can come from anywhere, it's very true. And some people, a lot of designers look at it from a very, very high level before they kind of come down into their smaller stories. I don't do that as much because we're smaller. So I kind of use what other people are doing as my macro and then break it down into smaller stories. So, for example, like my Positano story, when I'm doing research, I see a ton of primary colors, I see stripes, I see a lot of cotton, a lot of linen, and I'm like, this is what you want to be in Italy. And denim, like this is what you want to be walking around in Italy doing your thing. So that's kind of how I break that down into my story, where I see, and I also know what our customer likes. So I know that that's a story that I can build for us as long as I see it happening.
Right.
So there's definitely places and people that start very high up, and their designs, their stories could be based on something in a completely different country that they saw happening, that they were inspired by, that they're like, I need to make a whole story about this Grecian vase that I saw. Like there's that, it can totally work that way.
Right. It's so interesting too, and I can only speak from like a social media perspective, but you start to see you start to see these trends overlapping. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense with the macro of like you might start seeing what you're talking about, sort of a Positano vibe, like Southern Europe vibe going on in the fashion industry. And then the next thing you know, next summer, it feels like all of my friends are in Portugal or Spain right now. Like
Mhm.
it's kind of interesting, and it may not be correlative. It does sort of feel like trends drive other trends in industries as well. And you were talking about the economy and things like that. So it's interesting to think about it from that macro level and then taking it all the way down to the stories and your consumers and knowing exactly, who your person is and what they're going to like and where they're going to go. Um, can you were talking about prints and the fabrics themselves and understanding them. What actually goes into making clothes? Like, I feel like it's almost like the grocery store where I'm like, eggs come from the dairy case, and you're like, no, it comes from a chicken. So like, what actually, like, I just go on my phone and I'm like, I'll order a swimsuit. Like, what actually goes into that process and getting it from wherever you start. I don't even know where it starts, and then to the consumer.
So we can kind of start anywhere, honestly. A lot of the times we'll start from like a runway tear that we see. So there could be like a beautiful dress from Dolce and Gabbana that we're like, wow, this is really amazing. And we obviously have to translate it to be acceptable for our customer who's in our age bracket, and then also affordable, right? Because we're not Dolce and Gabbana, we're not selling dresses for $3,000. So we have to think about what fabric will this be beautiful in that we can still afford yardage. So that's why we have a sourcing team who they're responsible. There's a different sourcing person for the different categories, so they're responsible for when we show them a garment and we say we want this in this fabric, they're going to make sure we can afford it. And if we can't, they'll come back with suggestions of what we can afford and show kind of some submits to say, like, well, this is what we wanted, like, feel this fabric, this is what we wanted, this is what we can afford. Do we still like this? So it's all about how we can, like I said, make it affordable for the customer. So we start with that. And then when it comes to prints, we go to a print show, like a print market in New York, but we also have like key print vendors that we use all the time. And we meet with them and they kind of show us what's newest happening in the print world and they'll tell us what's been selling really well. And we can purchase prints from them that then become our proprietary artwork. So nobody else can buy that print, can sell that print, can use it. But Kara, who's my head CAD designer, she can do anything. She's amazing. And so she'll either recolor something if we bought it and we like it, she can color it however we want, or she can completely create something from scratch in Photoshop, or she can draw something and make it into a beautiful print. So starting from choosing the fabric, once we get what we can afford and we agree on a quality and we say this is the fabric we want, well then our tech designers, they'll create a block, spec of what we want the garment to be, how we want it to fit, and then they'll send their specs to our vendor and we'll send over, our designer sends over the fabric that it's supposed to be, the color that it's supposed to be, or the print that it's supposed to be, and they'll produce what we use as a photo sample for us, and then we'll try it on and make sure that we like it. And then from there, if we do, we proceed and put it into production. Does
How
that make
much?
sense?
Oh, 100%. And
Okay.
I mean, I feel like I need to find someone to explain how like you go from a plant to fabric to like I would not make it if there's like an apocalypse and we have to like make our own bread and clothes. Like I'm not gonna make it. I don't understand it. I don't understand how like any of it works, but that makes total sense. Um, and I just lost my train of thought thinking about like wheat. Like, how does wheat become? It's probably very simple. I don't know. Anyway,
How
sorry
does
about
wheat
that.
become bread?
Yeah, that makes total sense. That it does. It makes a lot of sense. How do you know how much? And this might not be your area, but like once you have that prototype and you're like, yes, this is what we want. It's the fit. It's the look. This is yes. Let's get it into production. How much do you know to produce? Like, do you do like a certain amount and then add on, or it's like you get what you get, and once it's sold out, it's sold out? Like, how does that work?
So it depends on the item. So we have our planning team that they, based on their history with the business and based on their research and what sells and what doesn't, they will say, well, let me say also some items, depending on the vendor that we get it from, that
Mm,
creates it, might have a minimum based on the fabric. So
that makes sense.
they they might be like, well, if you want this fabric, it's a minimum of 300 units. So you have to buy at least 300 units for us to make this for you. So that's fine.
Hmm.
Our minimum is typically 300 units. So we'll do that. Then our planning team will determine like, okay, this we could actually do 800 units. If, we could actually do 1,000 units of this. So they'll determine if they think we should bump up the buy and buy more of it, or along with the buyer, that
Hmm.
the buyer and the planner work together to determine, I think this needs more units. I think this needs less units. And then sometimes based on how the photography comes back after the photo shoot, they might even bump up the units even more. Like if it comes back looking really amazing in the picture, they might be like, wow, she's really going to love this. I think we need some more units behind this. But we are, in the way that we're smaller, to your point, yes, we do. If something sells out, it sells out. There are times when if it's really great and we'll reorder into it. But a lot of the time it's, if it sells out, it sells out.
I'm still thinking about that like purple tweed blazer that just I should have gotten it immediately. Now I know. I get it because once
Yeah.
it's gone. So over the course of your career, what changes have you seen in the industry during your time? And it could be at the
Industry.
macro level, like fashion as a whole or retail as a whole, or it could be individual to Boston proper.
I mean, it's definitely been wild seeing the change from stores to not. Like it's kind of been crazy, where as I came from retail, now seeing people are closing their doors, there aren't as many stores anymore, everything is really more web driven. That's definitely been a crazy thing for me to see. Especially because I do think there are still people that like to touch and feel their clothes, so it's definitely wild, but it shows the shift of the ages, right? Like the age bracket that we're in now and how it's shifting, it kind of shows the change there. And also the sustainability changes that I've seen has been really cool. How like a lot of people are much more interested in that, in how the fabric will wash and having an item that actually like lasts you longer. And like there is obviously still fast fashion, right?
Mhm.
Those places that sell
Mhm.
things for $15, and you're going to wear it once and that's fine. But I do think now people, especially my age, I feel like we're getting more into wanting to buy things that we can count on and we can wear
Mhm.
more, and that aren't just one day thing going out and throwing it away. So I do think sustainability has become a bigger thing, which I love. I'm trying to think what other changes. I think those are kind of the biggest ones, like especially the
Mhm.
stores closing. That's definitely a huge, huge change. Anytime somebody there's a change or a close of a store or a switch of a CEO. My CEO here is like, did everybody hear about this? Like we all, she always is like on top of it and like, I can't believe it. And because she's been in the business for a really long time. So she knows some of these people and
Yeah.
she's like, I can't believe it. I can't believe that they're gone or they moved or this person went here. Like it's
Didn't
interesting to see that.
didn't Amazon just buy Saks, or Amazon and Saks just bought someone else?
I think they merged with Neiman's. Isn't that what
Neiman's.
it
Yeah,
was?
that makes sense. Yeah. If that's not true, I'll
Yeah.
cut this. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
and it's interesting to what you said. I'm a huge online shopper. Like if I don't
Me
have to go to
too.
the stores, I prefer it. And
I'm
I'd
like that too.
rather return, which probably isn't great for the company I'm buying from, but I'd rather return it than actually go to a store. But when I'm buying something for a particular event or I have a vision in my mind, I will go to the store. And what I've found in the past, I'd say 5 years, is the stores aren't stocked.
Right.
It's really fascinating to see. And I'm 41 years old, and from as children, you only had the opportunity to go in the store, and retailers were so knowledgeable and asking. And now it's like, I don't know how they determine their staffing, what they keep in the store, what they don't. It's got to
Right.
be hard with everything being online,
Right.
and competing against like you said, against fast fashion. It's just a totally different world. I'm curious what it's going to be for my kids, like what that world is going to look like. But there's definitely still a place for that brick and mortar store. I mean, you
I
do want to
mean,
feel it,
it
you
would
want to
be
see it.
sad, as somebody who honestly grew up going to the mall. I mean, all I
Yeah.
did was go to the mall when I was a kid. We would go walk around the mall, or my grandma would take us shopping, and it was what we did all the time. So it's wild to think that it could potentially not be a thing at some point. That's crazy to think,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you never know.
We'll just have to wait and see. You're in a good position though, being catalog and web driven. So you're like on top of it. What inspires you? What are you most excited about in this industry? I know every now and then we'll text each other like, "Oh, did you see this?"
Oh my
Like what's
gosh,
exciting to
yes.
you right now?
When I look at the runway, there's times that I'm like, wow. Like I think about things sometimes. I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish we made some of these things, but I know it would be insane. But like the Met Gala, for example, that dress that had the butterflies that like actually moved, it's that kind of stuff that I'm like, holy moly, like somebody made that to wear on somebody's body. Like it's crazy. And I know sometimes people look at fashion as kind of like a shallow thing and whatever, but I feel like regardless, and this is a very Devil Wears Prada thing, it is important because you live your life in it. Even if you don't feel like you're making this choice that is so fashiony, people thought about what you're wearing. People thought about the garment, and they thought about the color and the print and how it was going to fit. And it was a whole thing. And I think a lot of people don't realize that when they put clothes on. So I do love that. And that does excite me to think about, like when we photograph our clothes and then when we see the customer in it. Like there's times when I see customers like out and we'll joke, like me and Carol send each other a text. We'll be like, BP in the wild,
That
and
is
we'll send
so
each other a picture
cool.
of
Yeah, I mean,
of a customer. Like,
there's people on vacation right now wearing the clothes that you a year in advance thought about them
right,
wearing. Like, and
right.
just like you said, just in
It's
the world. That's
wild.
amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like we'll send each other a picture and I'll be like, "That's your print. That's your print." And she'll be like, "Oh my gosh." Like we get so excited about it and I I wish the customer knew how excited it makes us because
Mhm.
we all love it. Like from our CEO down. Like when we see somebody in it, we are all like ecstatic. It's so cool to us. So that's definitely one of the exciting things, especially when it's something I was telling like one of the other marketing people that work here, especially when I see it from like my trend story down around, and then I see somebody in it, I'm like, wow, like I like had this whole concept and there it is like coming to life. It's really cool.
That's it's got to be so cool to see that. I think what you were talking about with the Met Gala, I understand, and this isn't the conversation for it, but I understand why people there was such an outrage, especially this year, with the most recent Met Gala, and maybe talking about tone deafness and things of that nature.
Yeah,
That aside, like I just see these as works of art, like wearable works of art. It's unbelievable that like you said, someone had that vision in their head. They fitted it to that person's body. They figured out how to do it.
right.
It's unbelievable. And you see it on the runway, and couture is just it's unbelievable in terms of the amount of work and effort and thought that goes into it. And then as you've been explaining, like how that trickles down to the consumer, it's it's interesting. I mean, it really is sort of that art world that trickles down, and that's the culture. Yes, I understand some of the criticisms, but we don't criticize art exhibits in at the Perez or at the Whitney or
Right.
things of that
Right.
nature. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. I guess they don't come with a $275,000 ticket or whatever it was, but
Exactly.
whatever. That's in a winter can figure that out. That's not for us to figure out.
Neither here
Um,
nor there.
exactly. It's neither here nor there. So this has been such a wonderful conversation. I can tell how much you love your job and how much you love the work that you do. What do you love most about it?
I really love putting concepts together. I get really excited when I can start pulling images and putting colors with it, and when we go shop and I find a print that like totally fits my story and I can see it coming together, I get very excited. I get like giddy about it and like can't wait to show everybody, you know? Like it's it really is like one of my favorite things to kind of play and put my stories together. My boss has told me before, she's like, I can tell you feel like she can tell with certain stories when I'm passionate about it because I get like very excited and she's like, I can tell that you feel so strongly about this, like that you feel so good about this. I'm like, I do. This is the story. Like I'm so excited and she'll get there with me. Like I can you know, we did a story for one of our spring events that was this like kind of newer feeling color palette with blue and green and we did pinstripes in it and I was like, this just feels so new and fun to me, and she was like, I'm with you, I'm going, I think it's so great. So that I think is exciting when I can kind of put something together and everybody else gets excited about it. I love that.
I try and ask everybody this, but I'm actually going to ask you something a two-parter. So one would be, what advice would you give to your younger self? The other thing that I would ask is, what advice would you give to consumers as they are approaching their choices in terms of fashion and what they're buying and how to think about it maybe a little bit differently than they might have prior to listening to this?
I would tell the consumer is the wearability of items. Even if, you know, I obviously love prints, even if it's something printed, what are like the multiple ways that you can wear that item, that you can make it feel new every time you put it on, that you can like be excited about it. That's what we're trying to do here a lot lately, is show her all the different ways that she can wear something and change it up. That also for me goes back to sustainability. Like how can you wear something so many different, change up the top, wear a different accessory, put on a different earring, wear a different shoe, wear put a different belt on it, like anything like that to keep it fresh for you and keep it fun to where you feel like you're getting the most out of what you buy. That's what I would tell people, like how can you keep it fresh? And then buying like a couple of your favorite things from the season to like make you feel, if it's your thing, if it's your thing to feel on trend, you know, what are like the couple pieces, like you see a ton of stripes, like which stripe feels best to you, and don't necessarily concern yourself with the stripe that everybody else is wearing. Like, what's the stripe that feels best to you? Or what's the
Mhm.
print that feels best to you? Like, that's because that's how you're going to wear it and you're going to feel good.
Yeah.
So, that's what I would say to a consumer. And then, what would I tell my younger self? I would tell my younger self, um, have more confidence in yourself and in your choices, because you know what you're doing, and you sometimes, I mean, everybody knows this, you kind of think a lot about choices or you second guess things, but I have learned, um, coming full circle in certain projects, that I do know what I'm talking about. Telling myself, like, have confidence in what you're doing and keep going, you know what you're doing.
Thank you so much for being on today. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours, and I need like a documentary with you about what your day-to-day life is and what a season is. And how can people find your prints and your clothes and everything that you're doing?
You can find us at bostonproper.com, and on Instagram, it's Boston Proper Official. And come check us out. We have some really amazing prints and some really great flattering styles, and we know you'll love it.
Amazing. I'm gonna have to buy some Positano inspired clothing and then just book the trip. So,
Right?
thank you again so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Wait, What Do You Do Again? For more information about today's guest, or if you'd like to be on the show, please visit megdeford.com. See you next time.